The woman gently tapped her finger on the boy's arm, and in the next second, a glowing sapphire appeared from beneath his skin. Without hesitation, she poured 80-degree boiling water directly onto it, and the boy's arm suddenly started swelling rapidly. But the woman remained calm, as if this bizarre scene was nothing new to her. She calmly pulled out a 30-centimeter steel needle and forcefully stabbed it into the sapphire, pushing it all the way through the boy's arm. The long needle instantly transformed into a restraining device that bound the mutation, finally controlling the boy's wildly changing arm. Just one day earlier, Mingji had still been an ordinary high school student, but everything changed after an unexpected explosion. Though he wasn't injured by the blast, the moment he stood up, a mysterious energy orb from the explosion's core splashed onto his arm, and then something terrifying happened. He saw what looked like a centipede crawling into his skin, only to vanish within seconds. At first, Mingji thought he was hallucinating and didn't take it seriously, but when he saw a survivor on a nearby tram, he rushed forward to help. Yet before he could reach them, an excruciating pain shot through his arm. Looking down, he was shocked to see a blue gemstone emerging from his skin, only for it to disappear again. That's when Mingji realized this wasn't a hallucination, but with no time to panic, he turned his attention to the wounded girl nearby. Just as she was on the verge of death, she weakly reached up and tapped his forehead with her finger. In the next instant, a strange mask appeared on his face. Frantically, Mingji tried to tear it off, but no matter how hard he pulled, it wouldn't budge. Then, a strange liquid engulfed him, transforming his body into that of a monster. When the soldiers arrived to investigate, they saw his monstrous form and assumed he was the one who caused the explosion, immediately opening fire on him. As he collapsed, his girlfriend heard his cry for help from within the monstrous voice. Seeing his wounds healing rapidly, the soldiers prepared to fire again, but his girlfriend leapt forward, delivering a powerful hand chop followed by a flying kick that took down the soldiers instantly. But before they could catch their breath, a massive fleshy ball suddenly dropped from the sky, and from it crawled out a terrifying monster. Bullets had no effect on it, and even tanks couldn't scratch it. The beast began firing lasers in all directions, splitting the school building in half, and its target was clearly Mingji. Though Mingji tried to protect his girlfriend, he hadn't yet adapted to his new body and nearly got her skewered. Luckily, the monster was nearsighted, which saved them both from certain death. But just when they thought they had survived, the monster launched another brutal attack on Mingji. With only his remaining willpower, Mingji fought back desperately, and just when he was about to be defeated, his girlfriend rushed to his side again and began helping him without hesitation. With her divine support, Mingji finally started to adapt to his monstrous form. Holding his girlfriend close, he landed a crushing blow on the beast and slowly watched as it weakened. But Mingji didn't stop. He continued striking without mercy. Just then, a mysterious girl descended from the sky and froze him in place, then took him aboard her spaceship. After receiving treatment, Mingji woke up but had no memory of his transformation into a monster. He looked at the over-the-top bandages the girl had wrapped around him and thought they were ugly and unnecessary. As he reached to pull them off, the red-haired girl stopped him immediately. If he removed the bandages, he might turn into a monster again and die once his magic ran out. But Mingji didn't understand her words. He thought she was kidnapping him to make him work on the spaceship for free. Angry, he marched off to find the captain and demanded to be sent home. But before he could finish speaking, the captain punched him straight in the face. After a heated argument with the captain, Mingji angrily ripped the bandages off his arm. In that moment, the blue gemstone turned blood red. His entire arm hardened like stone, and the electromagnetic waves he emitted summoned a bat-like humanoid weapon. Realizing the danger, the captain ordered the ship to escape at full speed, but the bat monster quickly caught up. The red-haired girl begged Mingji to hide, but he insisted on standing there acting cool. Speechless, she watched as the bat creature slashed down and effortlessly snatched him away, then flew off joyfully. Red Hair immediately chased after them on her mini flying machine and soon arrived above the monster. She fired a grappling hook and used an auto lift to get on the monster's back. There, she found Mingji wrapped up inside the beast, but just as she tried to save him, the monster struck her with its wing and sent her flying. Still, she got back up and kept digging, and at last, she pried open enough of the monster's flesh to grab Mingji's arm. Seeing he was still alive, she shouted his name again and again, and thanks to his strong will to survive, Mingji regained consciousness and allowed her to pull him out. After rescuing him, the two of them jumped back onto the flying machine and hurried away. Once they were at a safe distance, the captain raised his giant Italian cannon and blasted the bat monster into pieces. After this ordeal, Mingji finally calmed down. Even when drinking bitter Southern River tea, he gulped it down in one go without complaint. Seeing the boy so obedient, Red Hair was truly relieved. When he fell asleep, she kicked him awake and brought him to an old woman. This old lady was a master living in seclusion. She could teach Mingji how to control the power of the Zammed within him. But Mingji didn't want control. He wanted it gone. He just wanted to return to being a normal person. The old woman told him that was impossible. He would forever coexist with Xam'd. With no other choice and desperate to stay alive, Mingji had to accept the training even though he hated it. His trainer was none other than the red-haired girl herself. Soon, he became a pitiful, overworked assistant, stamping endless documents. After finishing that, he even worked as the ship's mechanic. But But one day, they spotted a strange airship floating nearby. The captain inside also sensed something odd and immediately ordered the entire ship crew to prepare. The order was clear: bring all the ship's civilians on board, and it kept being repeated again and again. Bring the ship's civilians on board, and they moved forward, but the opposing side clearly came prepared, instantly accelerating and overtaking the protagonist's ship, then releasing a thick smoke screen to block their view. Seeing this, Redhair immediately piloted his small aircraft out, and surprisingly, the visitors were not enemies, but rather someone he knew, Xam'd, a familiar face from his childhood. It turned out Xam'd had once taken care of Redhair when he was young before Redhair left and joined Bluehair Captain's crew. Redhair wanted the captain to dock the ship so he could have a chat with Xam'd, but the captain refused, believing Xam'd had now turned bad and that meeting him could put Redhair in danger. But Redhair didn't care. He insisted on meeting him. Though the captain beat him up for it, he was still heartbroken and drank alone that night to ease his pain. The next morning, the captain gave in and parked the ship right next to Xam'd's. Redhair finally got his wish and reunited with his old guardian. Xam'd wanted him to come back and become the group leader, but Redhair flatly refused, choosing to stay with the captain. After returning to the ship, they set off once more. But not long into their journey, thick black smoke was spotted ahead. The captain immediately sent the protagonist and Redhair to investigate. When they reached the source, they discovered a berserk man. Redhair leapt onto his back to try and save him, but after tearing open the monster's skin, he found that the man inside had already melted into green liquid. As Redhair prepared to dive in and rescue what remained, he was suddenly slapped away by the monster and turned to stone along with it. Seeing Redhair in danger, the protagonist rushed to help, but the monster had already torn off his bandage, unleashing the king's power in his right arm. Clearly, it was time for him to show off. His right arm transformed into a massive 40-meter-long blade, and he charged the monster, slicing through the stone that trapped Redhair's legs, saving his life. But the battle was far from over. The protagonist quickly stood and prepared to deal a final blow. Though the enemy was defeated, Redhair was furious, believing that if the protagonist hadn't interfered, he could have saved a life. The protagonist stood in silence, staring at the fallen monster, unsure if he had done the right thing. Soon, they returned to the ship, where the protagonist received a letter from his childhood friend Chin, who wanted to meet him. He asked the captain for leave to go find her, and the captain told him to ask Redhair for permission. If he agreed, he could go anywhere he wanted, but Redhair said no, claiming the protagonist hadn't fully mastered Zammed's power and might turn to stone in the wild. Still, the protagonist insisted, and Redhair had no choice but to agree. Under one condition, he had to take Rabbit, a device with tracking ability. Ready for his journey, the protagonist parachuted toward Chin's island, but he didn't bring a map and had no clue where the meeting place was. As he wandered, he met a herb-gathering farmer and asked for directions to Jefflin. The moment the farmer heard the name, his face changed and he transformed into a humanoid monster, chasing after the protagonist with the intent to kill. Forced into a corner, the protagonist had to release his Zammed power, slicing off the monster's arm, but the beast wasn't done yet. Just then, an older man with a scattergun appeared and scared the creature away. Grateful, the protagonist thanked him, and the man led him to the meeting place, a long-abandoned mine. After the war broke out, the northern government had stationed many humanoid weapons there. Meanwhile, Chin and Gushi had already ventured deep into the mine, where they found an old mech from decades ago. As they opened the cockpit, a monster appeared behind them. Chin thought the monster was the mech's original pilot, and the creature didn't seem aggressive, but Gushi disagreed and pushed Chin away, unleashing a full-scale attack. Chin, alarmed, ran toward the exit and was shocked to see the protagonist there. Tears welled up in her eyes as she saw the one she loved, and they ran to embrace. But danger was close. The protagonist fought the monster with all he had to protect Chin. Luckily, he had protagonist-level plot armor and managed to petrify the monster. Gushi appeared from the cave and immediately noticed the protagonist's arm, lifting his submachine gun to finish him off. Just as he pulled the trigger, the petrified monster self-destructed, blowing the bridge in two. Before anyone could react, a purple Xam'd descended from the sky and restrained Gushi, instructing Chin to tell the protagonist to run away quickly. As the protagonist escaped, Gushi's Zammed turned into a bearded man who warned him not to let hatred cloud his vision and to cherish life. After speaking, the bearded man jumped into the water and vanished. Not long after, Redhair arrived in time to rescue the barely breathing protagonist. After a quick patch-up, they returned to the ship. As the ship prepared for takeoff, a motorcycle suddenly crashed into the cargo bay. It was the bearded man who had saved the protagonist earlier. His real name was Lei Yu, and he used to be a crew member. He had been able to leave the ship because he had mastered Zammed's power. This time, he returned bearing gifts for his old friends. After a refreshing bath, Lei Yu turned into a handsome young man. As the protagonist's senior, he took it upon himself to teach him how to transform. So he arranged a practical training session where the protagonist would face none other than the little bat monster that had captured him earlier. The protagonist ripped off his bandages, ready to go all out. Redhair flew ahead on her small ship, approaching the monster while the protagonist leapt into the sky, grabbing the bat's collar. Redhair tossed him a seed and instructed him to shove it into the monster's body. Following her words, the protagonist punched the seed into the bat, causing it to puff up like a balloon and explode into a mess of green shards. He fell from the sky, but Red Hair caught him just in time. However, their crisis wasn't over yet. The radar showed 4 more monsters approaching the ship. Back on the ship, Lei Yu transformed into Zammed, drawing his blade to easily slash one bat apart. Another bat shot lasers at him, but he effortlessly blocked them with his hand. But the number of enemies was overwhelming, and the ship itself suffered heavy damage, prompting the captain to rush to the deck to assess the situation, only to discover that the long strip in the sky was actually made up of over 300 small Xam'd creatures. To protect the ship, Lei Yu called the protagonist to fight beside him and instructed Red Hair to stay behind and defend the ship. The protagonist showed his skills. Just like Luffy, his arms could stretch infinitely, and when he destroyed the enemy's control ring, he hadn't expected the now out-of-control bat to crash into the ship's wing, causing it to lose balance. Fortunately, the pilot's skills were exceptional, and they shut down the opposite engine in time to avoid a crash. Meanwhile, the tiny enemies had infiltrated the ship's interior, and the captain guarded the door with an Italian cannon, blasting away. But after a short while, his gun jammed, giving the little monsters a chance to charge through. Just then, the chubby brother arrived in time with a submachine gun, mowing down the intruders in the hallway. However, they didn't notice that one of the Zammed was still alive. It fired a laser and hit the newly arrived chubby crew member. A woman, enraged beyond reason, began unloading bullets at the monster with her gun. It turned out that 2.5 hours earlier, the same monster had nearly killed the chubby crew member with a laser blast. In an act of vengeance, the captain picked up his Thompson and sprayed bullets like mad. Just as the captain was killing to his heart's content, Red Hair ran out and started crying while holding the bodies of the monsters. The captain was speechless at the sight, but still finished off the remaining monsters in front of Red Hair. He then reached the ship's rear, where he confronted the true controller of the white monsters. This person had one goal: to capture the protagonist and Lei Yu. Unfortunately for him, the plan failed, and the captain's bullets from his submachine gun sealed his fate. After the battle ended, the ship was severely damaged and had to dock on a small island. Red Hair began thinking of going home and requested leave from the captain to visit. The protagonist wanted to tag along, eager to return to his own home and happily catch a ride with Red Hair. On the other side, Gushi hadn't stepped outside since meeting the protagonist, as he had been parasitized by a mysterious Zammed during the last battle. Chin comforted him, saying that if the protagonist could control the monster within, then Gushi surely could too. A few days later, the protagonist finally returned to his long-awaited hometown. The first thing he did was call Chin's house, but unfortunately, she wasn't home, so he asked her younger sister to pass on the message that he had returned. However, the sister's actions were quite chaotic. She informed her sister over the phone about the meeting location, which was overheard by the intelligence group nearby. Then she also told Gushi that Chin's beloved was back, which stirred a mess. Gushi went to the graveyard and saw Chin and the protagonist together, immediately breaking down. After chasing Chin for so long, he couldn't bear being the clown in the end. His jealousy erupted into fierce hatred toward the protagonist, and the Zammed inside him spiraled out of control. He didn't believe the protagonist was better than him. Why could the protagonist have everything while he had nothing? That hatred transformed him into a giant monster. Red Hair rushed forward, trying to awaken Gushi's soul, but he refused to listen. He only wanted to fight the protagonist. Not even Red Hair could stop him and was sent flying. Seeing no other option, the protagonist used his Zam'd power to confront Gushi, but being not fully transformed himself, he was no match and was quickly pinned to the ground. After overpowering the protagonist, Gushi confessed his love to Chin, thinking now he had everything the protagonist didn't. But Chin softly replied, "Thank you, Froze, but this made me realize I still love Aki." Hearing that, Gushi completely snapped. To fulfill his desire, he grabbed Chin and swallowed her whole. To rescue his childhood sweetheart, the protagonist resolved to fight Gushi to the end. Both were infected by Zammed, possessing extraordinary strength. In the fierce battle, the protagonist was overpowered and realized that relying on one arm wasn't enough to fight a fully formed Zammed. Soon, he was captured by Gushi. At the most critical moment, he unleashed all the power within him, donned the mask of the monster, and evolved into a complete Zammed. He knew Gushi had lost his mind and that he had to be stopped now to save Chin from inside him. With relentless attacks, the protagonist finally knocked Gushi unconscious, and Red Hair took the chance to plant a dissolving Zammed seed inside Gushi. With an explosive burst, both Gushi and Chin were rescued. Just then, a new airship appeared above, dropping a squad of mechs from the government sent to eliminate all Zammed infectees. Seeing them, the protagonist quickly pushed Red Hair aside and faced the incoming enemy fire alone. When the mechs exhausted their ammo, he lay on the ground, gravely wounded. Using telepathy, he told Red Hair to wait for him at the pier, as he would handle the enemy leader. Red Hair fled as instructed, and while all eyes were on him, the protagonist captured the enemy leader, buying enough time for Red Hair to escape. Only after confirming Red Hair's safety did the protagonist leave with the leader, only to realize that the man he caught was once a close comrade of his father. With no other choice, he released him, intending to meet Red Hair at the dock, but found the entire island surrounded by enemies. With nowhere to run, the protagonist was blasted into the river by a cannonball. Yet thanks to his protagonist aura, he didn't die, though his energy was completely drained and he lost consciousness. A human trafficker found him and planned to sell him to a northern tribe. Worse, the mask on his face hadn't disappeared, and most fatally, he had lost all memory. A black Zammed then appeared before him, but instead of harming him, it guided an elderly lady to his side. She purchased the protagonist and brought him back to a northern retirement home. Most of the residents there were war survivors, so they weren't shocked by his appearance. The elderly woman even arranged a job for him, assigned the task of delivering last rites for the villagers, and so the protagonist leapt off a cliff. As he plummeted downward, he suddenly heard the voice of a girl, Chin's voice, which awakened his true self. Just then, the airship's engine began to malfunction, and they were about to fall from the sky, but to everyone's surprise, the protagonist caught Chin's hand, and she was stunned to see that he had grown a pair of wings. This new form of the protagonist was witnessed by the nearby black Xam'd, who was in fact the Xam'd Emperor himself, and he immediately recognized that the protagonist's transformation was of the highest level among all Xam'd. After reuniting with Chin, the protagonist said farewell to the elderly woman who had taken care of him and boarded the airship bound for the Xam'd Emperor's fortress. Upon arrival, they met a white-haired young man who claimed to be an insider of the womb cavern and offered to guide them inside. He led them to a sacred place where the followers prayed for the Emperor's arrival and explained that these people were willing to sacrifice even newborns to revive the Emperor, believing human bodies to be filthy and that only by abandoning flesh and becoming a Zammed could one show the greatest reverence to the soul. Hearing this, the protagonist was dumbfounded, thinking it all sounded like a brainwashing seminar of a cult, and because of their ideological conflict, he was promptly kicked out by the white-haired man. At the same time, Southern Army warships hovered over the town where the womb cavern was located, dispatching humanoid mechs to purge the civilians below. But the white-haired man's people weren't any better. They used their own bodies as connectors to control cannons evolved from Zam'd, which easily wiped out the warships with laser blasts. While this chaos unfolded, the captain and Lei Yu snuck through the back entrance into the Golden Pagoda to ambush the Emperor, but they didn't expect enemy troops inside. Lei Yu was shot and the ceiling began to collapse. Using the last of his strength, Lei Yu held it up to protect the captain, asking him to take down the Emperor. With tears in his eyes, the captain charged into the Emperor's chamber, where the man wore a monster mask and clutched his head in agony as his body slowly turned to stone, guided by the younger sister of the protagonist's childhood friend. 2.5 hours earlier, the captain had planted bombs in the tower, and now, with one press of the detonator, the Golden Pagoda exploded. Soldiers outside cheered at the apparent success of the plan, but as they celebrated, one soldier noticed a mutant Zammed at the top of the tower. It was the Emperor, now revived. The first thing he did was unleash a beam of light, which shot a pillar into the sky and rained down darkness, quickly spreading across the continent. With this new power, the Emperor's strength multiplied, and he grew a massive circular disc on his back before cheerfully flying off to find the protagonist. Meanwhile, the protagonist and Chin were joyriding in the airship when Chin suddenly heard her sister's voice. They landed urgently and saw an explosion in the distance. Chin feared her sister was involved and rushed to the site, only to find a monstrous form. Desperate, she clung to her sister, crying for her to return to normal, but the girl had lost all reason and swallowed Chin in one bite. The protagonist was stunned. This was Chin's sister, so he couldn't fight her outright. Instead, he wore his mask of pain and spiraled into mental agony, nearly turning to stone. At that moment, Red Hair returned, reached out his hand, and momentarily awakened the sister's consciousness. But her resentment was still overwhelming, and she tried to continue her rampage. To stop her, Red Hair willingly let himself be eaten, planning to awaken her from within. It turned out she was also a tragic soul. Her mother had died in a car crash, and her own legs had been broken. Red Hair traveled into her deepest memories and drew out her mother's spirit for the sister to swallow. In an instant, she was transported to the moment before the crash, seeing her alive mother again. Her mother's encouragement gave her the strength to live on. Red Hair then quickly awakened the protagonist outside. The moment he heard Red Hair's voice, he perked up, took out the special medicine his father had given him, and transformed into his complete Zammed form. He charged straight at the monster and delivered the antidote into the sister's body with a punch. After the monster dissolved, both Chin and her sister were rescued. Red Hair, seeing the protagonist fully merged with Zammed, felt genuinely proud. But their peace didn't last long, for the Zammed Emperor had arrived before them. The protagonist spread his blue wings and soared into the sky, quickly encountering the Emperor. He begged the Emperor not to take the villagers from the womb cavern, but the Emperor laughed. It was those very people who offered their lives to revive him, and who was the protagonist to stop that? Realizing negotiation had failed, the protagonist prepared to fight. The Emperor too had a purpose. He didn't want to take the protagonist. The protagonist refused him again and again, and in frustration, the Emperor launched a laser beam at him. Luckily, the protagonist dodged, but the Emperor's relentless pursuit left him with no chance to retaliate. Yet in the midst of battle, the Emperor suddenly cried, and his tears turned into a rain of of black water that, when touching people, released their emotional burdens. Witnessing this, Pink Hair couldn't hold back any longer. To protect the people, he took medicine, turned into a Zammed, and soared into the sky to fight the Emperor. Just as the protagonist and Emperor clashed in an intense battle, Pink Hair charged in, intending to end the Emperor and his inner hatred. But before he could even reach the Emperor pierced Pink Hair with a single flick of his finger, leaving the protagonist speechless. How could someone so weak charge into battle like that, only to lose instantly and still need rescuing afterward? It was beyond ridiculous. After settling down the impulsive Pink Hair, the protagonist flew back up into the sky to continue his fight with the Zammed Emperor. But the Emperor wasn't stupid. He quickly launched a beam of energy to attack, yet the protagonist's movements were swift and agile. He flipped and twisted through the air, using the Emperor's arm as a springboard to propel himself right to the Emperor's chest. With all his strength, he drove his blade deep into the Emperor's heart. Just when the protagonist thought it was all over, the Emperor opened his mouth and shot another beam of light directly at him. When the light faded, the protagonist found himself inside the Emperor's spiritual world. It turned out the Emperor had been born dead, and only after being forcibly infused with consciousness had he become a Zammed. To help the Emperor rediscover his true self, the protagonist decided to give him his own name. The moment the Emperor accepted the name, his entire body turned vibrant with color, but in exchange, the protagonist lost himself. His consciousness drifted to his hometown, where everything looked familiar, yet he couldn't remember who he was. As he wandered in confusion and loneliness, Red Hair suddenly appeared in his world and told him that one day, someone would awaken him. At the same time, Red Hair had reached the very center of the womb cavern, where he used his own body to activate the sanctuary's power. A pillar of green light shot into the sky, followed by a massive explosion overhead. When the glowing sphere vanished, the land was restored to life. Those who had been turned to stone returned to normal. The war ended, and peace returned to the world. But that peace came at a cost. Red Hair had to be sealed inside the womb cavern for 1,000 years. At that moment, the protagonist also fell from the sky, landing right at the cavern entrance. A young boy nearby urged him to stand and stop the stone door from closing. But even though the protagonist used all his strength, he failed. He too lost consciousness and turned into stone. Sometime later, the captain discovered the stone figure of the protagonist and decided to take him back to his hometown. Thankfully, Chin visited him every day, and one day, the stone shell finally cracked. The protagonist regained his consciousness and returned to human form. Seeing him come back to life, Chin was overwhelmed with emotion, and though their journey had been long and filled with sorrow, at last, it was a happy ending.